And welcome to The Monster in All of Us, a panel about the critically acclaimed, bone-chilling comic book series, I Walk with Monsters. I'm Adrian Wassel, editor-in-chief of Vault Comics and our dedicated horror imprint, Nightfall. I'm joined today by Syndee Barwick and David Dissanayake. If you're looking to connect and learn more about Vault and Nightfall, they hold all the answers, so please reach out to them at the US Book Show virtual booth. I'm also joined by Paul Cornell and Sally Cantirino, creators of I Walk with Monsters. As a little bit of context here before I hand it off for introductions, issue number 6, the final chapter of I Walk with Monsters, is in stores now. And later this year, all the issues will be bound into a hauntingly beautiful trade paperback collection that releases October 13th, just in time for Halloween. So I wanted to hand it over for introductions. Paul, could you please introduce yourself?
Oh, hello. I'm Paul. I'm the writer of I Walk with Monsters, and I'm delighted to be so.
And Sally?
Hi, I'm Sally Cantirino. I am the artist on I Walk with Monsters.
Excellent. Thank you both so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking time out of, I know, your very busy schedules as creators. So, Paul, you and I had talked about a number of stories before we landed on I Walk with Monsters. And I can say from an editor's perspective why I knew that this was the right story. I think it does what horror does best. It's a story about processing the scariest stuff humans can encounter, and that transcends catharsis, and it becomes genuinely healing for people who have encountered a great variety of horrors in this world and in our lives. But I wanted to ask you specifically why this story now, what drew you to it, your inspirations, just generally how it began and grew from a kernel to something that is so such an incredible and personal story.
Well, thank you. We call it heartfelt horror. And as you've said, we hope it delivers the reader to a good place by the end of it. We're not looking to shake anybody who's been experienced these issues, because at the heart of I Walk with Monsters is a history of abuse, a cycle of abuse, and whether or not one perpetuates that. I just thought I was finally able to tell a true story in a fantasy way. And I hope that it delivers both the catharsis you speak of and the realization through JC and David, our leads, that actually the capacity for familial love, for a found family, for the ability to not have all one's nerve endings shredded off is there, because they do. This is a father and daughter, basically. This is a found father and daughter who love each other and who protect each other. And they both have terrible histories. One is somebody who's suffered and one is somebody who's caused suffering. And they find together a balance.
And that balance, I think, is the emotional heart of the story, but also part of how you've so effectively portrayed the horror, because it's scary. It's scary to see two people you care about in very different ways lashing out at each other and choosing not to. Sally, that tees up my first question for you, which is about anger. So when we initially announced this comic, you wrote a really incredible piece about anger, specifically a woman's anger and how it is perceived and oppressed. And I wanted to ask you if you'd be comfortable talking about that a little bit, and then how that anger, that portrayal of anger informed JC's character design and portrayal on the page, especially from young girl to young woman, because we see that transition in age when anger takes many different shapes, because a 12-year-old's anger is very different than a 20-year-old's anger.
Yeah, I mean, I think anger who gets to express anger, whose expressions of anger are excused or accepted is weighted in privilege, you know? Like we see angry young men, we see their lashing out get excused. You know, if you are a person of color, or if you are from a, like not a non-cis male gender, your anger is not accepted, is not seen as like normal, you know? And this is just from my experience, as a cis woman and being raised as a girl, is just like, you are taught that your anger is impolite, that it's wrong, that it's bad, that you're a bad person if you're feeling angry. Like you have to hold it in. It's not acceptable. You have to be polite, you have to be kind, you have to smile, you have to make yourself small and protect, like both small and not taking up space, and small to protect yourself. So I see JC holding in her feelings as someone who is trying to protect herself, and make herself small and make herself not a target and make herself disappear. And so you see her struggling with, portraying intrusive thoughts. Like I have to draw her intrusive thoughts about lashing out, and what those look like when you are a child versus what your intrusive thoughts look like when you're an adult. And that sort of visceral feeling, and when you're young and you don't understand what an intrusive thought is, and that it's not necessarily an action that you will take. That's scary when you're young.
It is, and I think that those portrayals are some of the most haunting sequences in the comic. They've stuck with me since you first, turned in the layouts, let alone the inks and the colors from Dervla, which are incredible. So this panel is being recorded, but it also looks like we have some live attendees. So I just wanted to make sure that live attendees knew that you can drop questions, feedback in the chat, and we would love to get to them at the end. So just wanted to note that. So that withholding that you were talking about, Sally, that sort of holding it here, isn't portrayed solely in the art. It's also something that is portrayed very carefully in the dialogue, which is clipped, perhaps more so than any other book I've ever worked on as an editor. Paul, you and I spent an enormous amount of time debating single words back and forth. And a lot of that came after seeing Sally's art, right? Like you had done a lot of the groundwork there with the dialogue, but then once we saw what you had done, Sally, and really creating these emotional moments, I think there was more work to be done, and we both knew that, but it was the nudging of a word back and forth. And so I just wanted to ask you about that, because that's a really different sort of puzzle to solve as a writer than we often kind of make for ourselves. And so I just wanted to ask you about that clipped language and how you went about having characters express themselves when part of what the story is about is that they're not expressing themselves.
Well, exactly. Basically, Sally's artwork was so expressive in terms of the acting, in terms of the emotion, that often there was just no need for dialogue. And I was consciously making it a very quiet book, a book about characters who do not share, who are very afraid to talk. This is a book about a young girl and a man who can literally become a monster. He can become a giant, huge, wolf-like thing. He can become a dog. He can become anything he needs to be in that moment. It's more instinctive than anything else. And because he can do that, he's working off his guilt about his past by helping her. The two of them hunt down abusers. And they finally, at the end of the first issue, they come to the town which is kind of at the heart of JC's own darkness. And the monsterness is something that Sally can do incredibly. There are some extraordinary monsters in this book, and they're done with when I say childlike, I don't mean she brings a childlike sensibility. I mean, she understands what the rage of a child is like, and she puts it on the page. And it's fine art. And they're done with a childlike sensibility in that regard. And also the acting is tremendous, as I said.
Oh, I've muted myself. Sally, to Paul's point about the monster and then the character acting, I know we've spoken about this a bit before, but I'd love to just hear about some of your influences for those character designs and for the monster design specifically, because you are balancing these raging highs with the monster and then these very reserved lows with the characters.
Do we want to start with like the character design and then talk a little bit about monster design?
Yep, that
Okay.
Sounds perfect.
Yeah. So I think we'll start with David's character. Is that David was the most challenging one for me because I didn't want to fall into a lot of the same sad dad tropes that you see in stuff like The Last of Us or Supernatural, with like Midwestern sad dad. Like there's sort of like this visual shorthand that we have for it. And I was trying to not fall into that and sort of make him sort of lanky, tall, thin, as opposed to being like physically imposing as a person. I think there's a lot of things where I was drawing my own dad into David physically. There's some like gestures that he does that are like very much like my father. And and both when he has the shearling jacket, there's sort of this like, it has that wool on the inside where it's sort of like almost a reverse like sheep's clothing. Like the sheep is inside. The sheep is the protected soft part inside, as opposed to JC's vest that has the like faux fur inside. It has like the wolf fur inside. Her vest is based on when I was so right when I was doing the character designs for this, I had moved back home and I was going through photos with my mom and I was struggling with the design for JC's vest. And there was this like green and brown vest that my mom was wearing in her honeymoon photos in Canada. And like, there's something about like the sharp points of the vest and the faux fur. And I was like, that's it. Like the colors aren't quite right. And Dervla ended up picking like perfect sort of almost like vintage 70s-ish, like oranges and pinks and browns for it that were perfect. But it was like that. And I incorporated this zigzag that was sort of stolen from like Fair Isle knitting designs, because that always looks like teeth to me. And so, yeah, I mean, I knew right away what I wanted JC's hair and face to look like. I immediately just saw in my head that she had this like side braid, and going from like the two braids as a child to like one braid that is easier to maintain to at the end of the last issue, her hair being let down. And then with monster design, when we first talked about the monster design, we started with like, it's not a werewolf. We're not drawing a werewolf. This isn't a werewolf story. It's a shapeshifter. So it wasn't until I started inking and found a texture for the monster that it really like felt cemented to what I wanted it to be. Because it's like, I knew I wanted it to be this staticky shape, this shifting shape, this thing that feels like a blur, or it's like on the edge of your vision, or in like the early hours of the morning when things are sort of like fuzzy. It's like, how do I render that as a creature? And then when I'm drawing a second monster at the end, how do I contrast these textures and shapes and physical forms of them?
Well, it came out brilliantly. From the very first time we see the monster and to its various iterations and different forms, there's this kind of felt connective tissue where you always know that it's David, and you always know it's a monstrous form even of him, even if it's different, and that goes to your point, Paul, about how the monster is what David needs to be in that moment, and that it's instinctual. And I wanted to just ask, the kind of simple question of where that came from, that idea to not do the werewolf, but instead to do the shapeshifter.
Well, why is it a wolf? Mere tradition. I just wanted to bring this from the heart in all respects. And as soon as you say werewolf, you got a bunch of stuff. And this isn't a wolf, this is rage. This is an attempt at absolution. This is something raw. And Sally Cantirino is a genius. And I lucked out when we got her. And so many subtleties. But I think the biggest connection of all between the writing and the art is the idea that this is raw emotion, that there's nothing culturally shaped about this beast, that it's not the product of lore or mythology, it's just something from right in there, and hence not a werewolf.
And quite truly proto-mythic, right? Because it's like that's where all the lore came from. So you're writing a story about cutting straight to that emotional heart of where the iconography is born for things like rage and fear and an entire genre like horror. So I wanted to ask a kind of question specifically for any book buyers who would be tuning in, listening to this, and that is why this story is important, you think, both of you, as a story for readers. What we've talked about the story about JC and David as both sort of recipients of rage, and then individuals who take that rage back out into the world. But I wanted to give you both an opportunity to talk not just about the story, but thematically why you think it's an important story for readers and an important story to put on bookshelves.
Sally, do you want to go first?
No, you can go first because I know you have a brilliant answer for this.
Oh boy, okay. Basically, I think that this story is a horror story that if one engages with it as somebody who has gone through some form of trauma, and which of us hasn't gone through some form of trauma, but specifically a large trauma, and maybe specifically an abusive trauma, it takes you on a journey. It takes you on an emotional journey. It sings the blues for you. It hopefully takes you through some dark places, but it absolutely takes you out the other side. And we felt such a responsibility to do that. It's from my heart very much so. And I didn't want to hurt anybody with this comic. And I hope it helps. If a comic can do that, I hope it helps some healing. So that's why I would say I think there should be a place for it in the library, especially a library for teens. Yeah.
Sally?
Yeah, I wanted to let Paul answer first because that was what he said was something that he has expressed about the series since basically our first conversations about it, is, wanting to explore this very heavy, dark topic, but very kindly, not like we don't want to re-traumatize, like you don't want to re-traumatize people, but you do want to be able to broach this very dark subject matter. And I think Paul's approach as a writer is just so kind and very gentle and forgiving of, very kind towards the characters in the story of JC and David. I think he treats their emotions, what they go through, with a lot of grace. And I think for me personally, horror is a really wonderful genre and space to take something that you're afraid of and face it and know that the experience will end. Like, we don't always have that in our daily life when we're facing things that are scary. It's like sometimes things are open-ended, but when you're exploring horror in a fictional setting, there's an end. That when the movie's over in an hour or 2 hours, it's over, it's done. Or when you finish reading the book, or you put it down when you need to put it down, you can step away from it. So it gives kind of a small, safe space to confront fears or reflect on your own experiences or fears.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you for that. Also, I wanted to say this is not about revenge. It's about the complexities of revenge. It's about how awkward revenge is. The catharsis is not taken through revenge.
No, it most definitely is not. And I think the final issue will surprise everyone who reads it. I know it certainly surprised me. I've seen reviewers say how surprised they were by it, but also how effective it was, which was really rewarding. And something I wanted to talk about is just how incredible reader retention has been for this series. Everyone knows that a comic book kind of has two lives, right? It releases in its single issues, and then it comes out in its collected edition. And the fear is always that when you have such a strong debut like we had with #1, that you'll lose readers, and you'll lose them rapidly, because there's just always something new coming out, and something usually really great in that new stuff. But readers stuck around, and I think that is a testament to what you've both done, and not just what you've both done, but also Dervla Kelly on colors and Darren Bennett on letters. What this entire team has done to create that emotional journey that you were both articulating. I think readers stayed because they needed to see that ending that you were talking about, Sally. I think it connected with people. It certainly did with me, in a way where you knew beyond catharsis, you were going to get something really rewarding out of this story coming to a close. So we're very close to time. And I just wanted to thank you both so much for taking time out of your day to talk about this story, and give you an opportunity to offer any closing thoughts you have before we bid farewell.
Not at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I mean, my only closing thought is that I'm incredibly proud of the book that our team made and the story that we told. And I'm incredibly proud of the the reach that it had, and the effect that it has had. And I just feel very lucky that I got to be part of it.
Well, we all feel incredibly lucky to get to work with you. And as the editor, I can say I am extremely lucky to work with everyone. Oh, it looks like, I saw something pop up in the chat. I just wanted to make sure we weren't missing any questions, but I don't see one. So thank you both so much. Really appreciate you taking time out of the day. Anybody watching, please explore the US Book Show virtual booth for Vault and our dedicated horror imprint Nightfall. There are extended previews of not only I Walk with Monsters, but all of our many series. And there's some really cool downloadable goodies for I Walk with Monsters, including backgrounds and bookmarks and all sorts of cool things like that. So please click around the booth, ask questions, and take as much as you want to take, because it's all there for free. So thanks, everybody.